All right, welcome everyone. This is our second session in our dementia happy hour. This one's titled Communication Skills and Helping Care Recipients Face Change. This is gonna be an hour-long happy hour with two guest speakers who have been helping us put on this dementia happy hour sessions. Before we get started, I just want to mention we do try to have people kind of keep themselves on mute while the speakers are talking. It helps kind of limit the background noise. If you have questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself, ask. You're also welcome, if you have access to the chat box, to drop your questions in the chat box. We will be watching it and then we'll bring them up at different times during the presentation. If you aren't, for those on your computer or on computer Zooms, the mute button and the stop video button are in your bottom left-hand corner. The mute looks like a microphone, the video looks like a camera. You can turn those off and on anytime you need to. If you're on your phone, some phones have like a mute on it. You'll see it on the screen. If you do need help, we can mute on your end. So if there's a lot of background noise, we might mute, but you'll have to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. Now I'm going to introduce, actually, before we get started, I want to quickly have Valerie Sosis do her introduction, since most of you, I think, were brought to us by Valerie. So Valerie.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you guys have come on. Oh, I see you guys. Woohoo. Well, I'll just introduce myself. Valerie Sosi and Shieto, last chin, slow, cut this and he bushes chain. Twitter gene, so here for coming and being part of our happy hour. We said sipping, no tripping. I have my coffee here, my iced coffee. So I hope you guys have whatever you guys want there. Don't get crazy, okay? Because we're gonna go into dementia stuff. And you guys have a great class. If you have any questions, if we can't see your name or anything, please let us know in the chat so we can get you down for attendance. And that is about it. I'm so glad you guys made it.
Thank you, Valerie. So now I'm going to introduce our two guest speakers who are going to be doing today's presentation on dementia communication skills. Ruth and Yuda. I'm handing it off to you two.
Hi guys, how are you? I want to introduce you guys to a very dear friend of mine. Yuda Lokvig is kind of in Santa Fe. She's kind of the Alzheimer's godmother and fierce advocate for people with dementia, super creative, arts background, design background, but also really, really solid advocate for elder rights and elder connection to the world. And we've been debating and working together for 25 years at this point, I think. And
you're aging us, Ruth. Honey, we were 10 when we started.
Yeah, I was going to say we were.
In our DNA, right?
We were 5. When I started, I was always the youngest person in the room, and now I'm the teacher. So
you're right. Same here.
Yeah. So and Yuda, one of the things that Yuda is really, really skilled at is looking at how to communicate with people with dementia in a really fine-toothed way that's also really empowering. So I'm going to let you get started and we're going to bounce off of each other. One thing to remember is we're discussing communication is something that came up last week, which is the way we perceive the world may not be true for somebody else. And that's a really, really important thing with Alzheimer's.
You're right. Thank you.
Reality is negotiables. And memory, and to quote Yuda, memory is overrated.
Absolutely. I totally agree. The older I get, the more I agree, by the way. So, uh, and like you said, everybody sort of, we all live in different realities. Even now, even this group right here, we all live in different realities depending on our backgrounds and our upbringing and whatever, you know. And so, of course, when it comes to people living with dementia, it's even more extreme. You know, I mean, we have common. I know that 90% of what we are in this group is very similar, but then there's that 10% that's not. And with people with dementia, that can actually be expanded a lot to the point that we are living in completely different worlds. So what I had to learn ages ago, I've been doing what I do for 30 years now, and I learned what I know actually from the people I worked with who had dementia at all different levels, including very advanced. And you know, it was hard. It was hard learning that way because I made tons of mistakes. That's how you learn, by making mistakes. So these are some of the key things. I'm just going to give you the key points. And Dana, could you pull up the communications page, please? These are the basics, okay? And if you can get this down, not only is your work with people with dementia going to be a lot easier, but with anybody else, actually, if we all practiced what's on this page, right now, nothing.
The page just disappeared.
I'm sorry. There you go. If we could practice this, all of us, we wouldn't have any divorce. We wouldn't have any delinquent children either. But you know, we're going to do our best. And this, I'm telling you, this is not easy. I know that. I know it's not easy. But these are some of the key points, and I'm not going to go through all of them because, first of all, it takes too long. But these are all based on things that I observed from working in a community, and in many cases, actually observing staff making mistakes, not intentionally, like baby talk. We do that. We tend to do that. All humans do that when we perceive somebody else needing help or having issues or whatever. You know, we go into a higher pitch. And the thing about people with dementia is that they may lose a lot of their abilities, but I'm convinced that their ability to pick up on nonverbal communication are
Is
actually
higher than
higher,
stronger.
yeah. So when you know, when you're talking baby talk to a person with dementia, it is incredibly offensive and demeaning.
Well,
And
and take a minute and think of somebody you've worked all your life. You have somebody who's saying, honey, let's go change your clothes now, please. Honey,
yeah.
what's your
Exactly.
response going to be?
Exactly. And it doesn't even have to be that. It's that even if we go into a higher pitch. So if this is my normal voice and I say, oh, let's go change your clothes, without the endearment, it's just be aware of it, because we do it all the time. I can guarantee you. Compliments and humor go a really long way. Okay, let me tell you that the three big tools I've used all these years is compliments. Number one, whenever I first greet somebody, I will find something I can compliment them on, because they don't get enough of that. And I deal mostly with people who are actually living in facilities, and you know, they get ignored a lot. So if I can find something to compliment them on, you know, that color you're wearing today is beautiful. It really brings out the whatever in your eyes or whatever you want to come up with. Doesn't matter. You can find something. And humor, but it has to be something that's shared. This is difficult. Humor is tricky because it can be offensive to somebody. We have to be very careful. But much more important than that is never to argue, scold, or criticize.
Mhm. And
Boy, is
you-
that tough. Boy, is that
and you-
tough.
You
Yeah.
and I have had an ongoing dialogue about never argue, scold, or criticize for
Right,
a long
right.
time. Because
Oh, I
I've
know.
had,
That's what I mean. I mean, it's almost impossible. But so if we say this to ourselves, so never argue, scold, or criticize, find another way. In other words,
Mhm. But that
don't go
doesn't
into a
mean,
criticism, because when you do that, and you know that, Ruth, if we arguing is one thing, discussing is different from arguing, okay?
yes,
But if you scold somebody or criticize them, you are immediately putting them off. You're
But
putting
that
them on the
does-
defensive. How are you
but
going to
it
get through?
doesn't mean
them?
that you can't set boundaries. I think there's a difference between scolding and criticizing and setting boundaries. So
That's
appeal
what I
to the,
mean. That's what precisely why I use those words.
Mhm.
You know, I use those terms because of what they mean. And because we need to think of another way to say the same thing in a way that a person can receive it and hear it. And then we can work with it so they don't shut down immediately. Because we're all like that. If you're told that you're doing something wrong, you know that your defenses are up, but you're not going to hear what the person has to say. Okay, so let's scroll a little bit more, Dana, please.
I think the reason and explain one is huge.
Okay,
And-
that's good.
And there's a reason for the reason and explaining one being huge. What happens when somebody tries to reason you out of your own perception of things?
No, you can't.
You know,
You can't. Anyway, let's go through this really quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But these the other important ones here are the do you remember and do you want? Because if we can avoid both of those, but there are other ways to basically ask the same thing in a way that's safe. In my experience, if I say to you, do you remember whatever, and it's out of the blue, like if we've been talking about something else and all of a sudden I said, do you remember when we went to the movies 2 months ago or 2 years ago, whatever, and it's out of the blue. And when you have dementia, it takes you that much longer to process questions or information of any kind. So when I throw it at you just like that, you're going to say no. Then you may still be thinking, do I remember going to the movies with you?
would you
I'm not
ask
so
the blind
sure.
person to
But
see?
it's much safer for a person with dementia to immediately say no. And the same thing with do you want? Like my dad, as he got older, his English was worse and worse, and his native Danish came back to him. And staff at his facility would ask him what he wanted, or whatever was on the menu that day. Do you want this or do you want that? And there was always something that was pretty foreign to him. So he would, in his case, I mean, he found a way around it, but just, that sounds good, whatever the first one was. But you're not going to get necessarily get an honest answer unless it's like, do you want a cookie or do you want ice cream?
Well,
Say that at noon you ask somebody, do you want spaghetti for dinner? Well, it's noon, so that's crazy. Do you want to go see so-and-so tomorrow? Again, with dementia, that's unfair because you lose track of time.
Can I chime in on one other little piece to this one, Yuta? In a very
Okay.
practical way, you're setting yourself up for failure. Do
Oh,
you want to
absolutely.
take a shower now?
Right, right. You never do that. And
Word.
basically anything that you need, you know that they need to do, you never ask if they want to. But there are other ways you can do it. You can say, you know, I promised you that we could take a shower right after lunch. So I have time right now. How about you?
Another pitch is, can you help me with something in the back? Can you help me with something?
Absolutely, always. Yeah, yeah. Okay. You mentioned, Ruth, you mentioned living in a different world, in a different reality.
Mhm.
And that's what that stands for, the next one, the next line, respect alternate realities. And that's the biggest thing, actually. We need to lend, the way I put it is to people is that we need to lend ourselves to that person wherever they're at. They're not going to come to us.
Yeah.
We have to come to them. So, for instance, we had one place I worked with, we had 14 residents. All of them were women except one. And, and one of the women had, her reality had been for like a month that she was living in a dorm. It was college days. I got her a couple of notebooks and she'd walk around with her notebooks under her arms, you know, took it very seriously. And when this man moved in, and she was horrified. She, we can't, the man, what's he doing here? So I sat her down and said, well, you know, colleges are really changing a lot, and they're starting to have co-ed dorms. And, you know, as long as people have private rooms, you have your private rooms and he has his private room. So, it's just how things go. It's a modern thing to do. And she was okay with that, but that was going into her reality.
I worked with a lady who used to really stress out about 4:35. I've got to pick up the kids. Supper's not ready. She was a single working mom most of her life. And she would get really anxious. So what we would do is go set the table for dinner. The rabbi's picking up the kids. The rabbi will bring the kids by and we'll get ready for dinner. And by the time she got ready for dinner, she was calmed down and ready to sit down and eat. And the kids stopped needing to be picked up.
Yeah, because it was a perfectly valid anxiety that she had. You know, and actually, in my latest book, I talk about body language and body clock, because we assume it's a dementia. It's not necessarily dementia in this case. It's simply that we all have body clocks. If we have had roles that, certain roles for most of our lives, like if we're parents, our children, it's just built into us. And we know that, okay, it's close to bedtime, it's close to lunchtime or whatever.
Otherwise, just press pound to continue. Please enter the meeting passcode followed by pound.
Uh-oh. We okay? Yeah. Anyway, so I would look at body clocks. When you have somebody who all of a sudden changes into almost a different personality, rather than to blame it on dementia, first look into the body clock. And you mentioned about picking up children.
That's also true for sleep.
Absolutely.
Some people's body clock changes around sleep.
Right.
So
right.
We don't try to get people to sleep at Vista with meds. We let them stay up all night, which means there are people who sleep all day, but they've worked the night shift. I love the line before body language though, because I think it's important. Beware of behavioral expressions. There's a real tendency in the field, and I occasionally catch myself doing it, talking about behaviors or talking about a person like their behavior,
Mhm.
you're not a behavior. You're not a sundowner. You're not a feeder. You're a human being. You're a human being who may have problems and may need help, but you're a human being first. None of us, including somebody with Alzheimer's, should be judged on our worst day.
Right.
If we are,
Okay.
we would all be in trouble.
Right. Well, we just talked about with body clocks, honey. That is often used. Like my dad that I'm caring for, uh, he gets really awful at like around 4 in the afternoon. What am I going to do? Can you give me some pills to calm him down? And I'm sorry, but it most likely is his way of trying to express something to you that he's not able to do verbally. Like maybe he's hungry, maybe he's sleepy. And if 4 o'clock, yes, sundowning, maybe, but it might just be body language and not necessarily sundowning. Because anybody who has worked an office job, for instance, or a retail job almost all their lives, that is so built in. Teachers, you know what time it is. Your body knows what time it is.
And people who do farm work and ranch work too. You wake
Same
up
thing, right?
before
Exactly.
dawn.
Exactly. Right. So, when whatever is happening around me, if I have dementia and it's getting to be in mid-afternoon and nobody else is doing anything to go pick up the kids, I get very frustrated. If I have lost my verbal skills at that point, I'm going to do something weird. So
Well,
that would be called the behavior. And next thing you know, the doctor will prescribe some kind of sedative or antipsychotic or whatever.
and if our response to this lady would have been to try to correct her and say, well, your kids are, one of your kids is 58 and your other child is 60. And they
Right.
both, your 58-year-old son lives in California and your 60-year-old daughter lives in Santa Fe, but she's traveling to New York. We probably would have had her screaming at us and hitting
Oh,
her.
yeah, absolutely.
Because
Because at
we'd
that
have
time,
been
I'm at
lying
20.
to her.
I'm at 25 or 30-year-old with 2 young children, and I'm supposed to go pick them up.
I think that
And I don't care what you try to do to talk me out of it, it ain't gonna work.
the
So
best,
what can you do instead?
yeah,
What we did, we actually had a case with a woman who was, she was an angel throughout the day, except when it came to mid-afternoon. And she ended up in hysterics. Literally sobbing, screaming by the door, but unable to tell us what it was. And that's what it was. Her children were waiting at the school as far as she was concerned.
mhm.
So once we learned that, what we did, we just told her that her next door neighbor was going to pick up all the kids today, but she would have to do it tomorrow because she was that kind of person, no favors, right? So we had to, and of course, the same response every single afternoon where the same thing happened. So you find things that fit with whatever you know about that person
Mm-hmm.
in that situation.
Oh, and one of the best stories on realities and perception is I had a son walk into my office sobbing one time because his mom had made a pass at him. And it was a pretty intense pass.
Mm.
And what we did for the son was to get a hand mirror and a picture from his mom's room of his dad at the same age. And they could have, that apple did not fall far from the tree. He looked exactly like his dad. What we changed the discussion to was, no, your mom is not hypersexual. No, she does not need meds. You look like your father, who she was deeply in love with. And his revelation with that was, oh, wow, my parents had a really cool relationship. Maybe I need to take my wife out to dinner more often. And,
Right.
and so his wife got more flowers and went out to dinner more often. And he realized he could just change the subject and redirect mom to looking at the yard, or talking with the chickens or the goats, or making a drawing, or shift to the intention somewhere else. But for him, it ended up being, oh, wow, my parents had a neat relationship, instead of, we need to call the doctor and drug this woman.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, that's a more common reaction is to find a medication. Dana, do you want to go to the other handout, please? The other thing I want and I'm not going to go into this a lot, because you'll all have this. If you don't have it already, you'll all have it, okay? Inappropriate terms. You want to scroll a little bit so we can get to the inappropriate terms, Dana?
There we go.
Here we go. That's beautiful. That's enough. Okay, here are a whole lot of terms that we use all the time in this field. The one big problem with it is that they do two things. First of all, they are basically sort of marking the person we're working with, diminishing them, vocalizer, aggressor, that's all sundowners that we just talked about. You don't call a person by their so-called behaviors or attitudes. The other problem with all of these is that we think differently. If we get used to using terms like the long goodbye, for instance, which I absolutely hate, we are going to keep ourselves in a state of sadness and grief. If we use terms like invisible, that's how we start thinking of people. Whatever language we use with others and ourselves, because a lot of this we use with ourselves, is going to affect the way that we personally react to a situation. And it's going to be very much harder on us, but also, of course, it's going to affect the person that we're working with. We're going to treat them as a victim. We're going to treat them as empty shell, batty, nuts, all of that. And nobody is an empty shell, you guys. Even at the very last end of their lives, nobody is empty. There's something in there.
And a lot of
times we can sing a song or two together,
Well, and I've seen people at the very, very end of this process do things that are deeply, deeply connected and compassionate, even if they're really struggling, even if life is really tough. Watched two ladies sitting by the window at Sierra Vista one time, very, very deep into Alzheimer's, both of them. Both of them were nonverbal. One had major neurological issues, and she was very anxious and starting to cry out. Her friend reached over, stroked her hair, held her hand, and rocked her chair for her. Knew exactly what to do in the depths of Alzheimer's. So there was definitely something there for both of them. And they had this really deep, compassionate moment. Doesn't mean that life, especially for caregivers, is not going to be really, really tough. Yuta and I worked with a lady. We both worked with this lady. And the earlier part of her disease, she struggled, but the later stage, part of her later stage was just hard. Her husband put it, she did it the hard way. That can happen, and it can be really painful to watch. but there's still somebody inside. The person is still there. And if a caregiver is exhausted, it's a lot harder to realize that. This is where the whole, and we're both going to nag you guys on this one, the whole self-care thing is really, really important. Some of you guys are working as caregivers and going home and taking care of somebody. No, give yourselves a huge round of applause right now because you're superheroes.
Right.
You know, this is intense. And all the communication and Alzheimer's training does not matter if you haven't had a good night's sleep in a week or two.
Right.
You're gonna forget it.
And I have a suggestion, a very strong suggestion. I wish somebody would take me up on it. If you have access to a support group, if you're a home caregiver alone with the person you're caring for, you need relief. If you don't get relief, you're gonna get sick, and the statistics are very bad for caregivers who stress out like to that degree. So my suggestion is find a support group.
Mhm.
Get
Nick-
involved with the other people in that support group, and if you can set it up so that 2 or 3 families can collaborate with each other.
Mhm.
They can do things together. Just doing something with other people is a huge relief, even if it's still hard work. But it's an emotion, you sort of ease the burden that you have emotionally. And then also, if you can get it to the point where your loved ones or the person you're caring for knows the others so well that you're comfortable leaving him or her with the other one. You
Yeah.
take turns that way. That way you can do respite if nothing else is available and you don't have the money to hire someone, which is, a lot of people don't have the money to hire a person to come in. You can share it. You're sharing the care, in other words. And you get to know people who are in the same boat that you're in.
There's a mutual friend that Yuta and I have, Nicolette, who does a really, really amazing, and I'm going to make you to explain the Alzheimer's Cafe. But she does an Alzheimer's Cafe out of Farmington, and she is one of the most amazing resources out there for caregivers. So we need to put her Nicolette's info in the chat box or email it to Dana.
Good. We'll do. Yeah.
But now you have to define an Alzheimer's Cafe.
Okay. An Alzheimer's Cafe is simply, it's a social event that in our case happens once a month. At this point, it's virtual, obviously. I'm hoping that we'll be back in person next month. It's just a time for people to come together, people who are living with dementia with their caregivers, families, and friends. And I usually make sure that there's several different options for people. They can make art projects, or we do sing-alongs, or often is we just talk. And what has been beautiful about the Alzheimer's Cafe that I run here in Santa Fe is that I've had people walk in first time, nervous, of course, like, what is this? And they'll tell me afterwards that often they couldn't tell the difference between people with dementia and their caregivers, because everyone is so relaxed. And they're, if you make a mistake, so what? And it's been a very positive thing. I started the cafe here in Santa Fe in 2008. And it turned out that I was the very first one in the country at the time. I had no idea. I just assumed to me, it was such a perfect option for people that I just assumed everybody had it. And so since then, actually, I've helped thousands of cafes getting going around the country. So I'm glad that they're doing that. And if you have one and they're back in action in person in your area, please look them up and get involved.
And part of communication is not just communicating with the person you're caring for, or the person who's struggling with Alzheimer's, or the person who you're responsible for. It's also communicating with yourself, getting some kind of network of support, and also learning how to communicate with other professionals. We have, Yuta and I, a lot of the way I think is in stories. And there are a couple damn doctor stories. One of them is not about the doctor, it's about my communication. The doctor in this particular case was an angel. But the damn doctor story kind of goes like this, the first one. It's rainy, nasty winter day. I'm running late for work. I'm running late because I was working off-site. The job off-site ran late. I had to pick up a lady to go to the doctor. She was in a specialist office in town. It was a routine visit. Her son had called her before lunch and, just making conversation, said, "You have a doctor's, I hear you have a doctor's appointment today." 2 hours before, more than 2 hours before she had the appointment. At first, she got terrified. Too much information too soon. And our nurse got her calmed down. It's just routine. That worked until after lunch. After lunch, and memory is tricky because it was emotionally charged. So she remembered she had a doctor's appointment. They go to get her ready to go. And I walk in the building, and Sierra Vista is quite a large ranch style home. So across the building, I hear this normally very sweet, kind lady screaming, "I don't want to see the damn doctor. Why do I have to see the damn doctor? I hate the damn doctor." And it literally shook the windows. And I come in, little activities director self, hadn't taken the time to center myself or breathe before I walked in. No deep breath. And very gently tried to say, "Oh, but he's a nice guy. It's just routine. Don't worry." Didn't work. Wrong answer, Ruth. Wrong answer for two reasons. One is I didn't validate her feelings. I was trying to reason. Oh, he's a nice guy. It's not a big deal. Two, it put me on the side of the damn doctor, which is not where I needed to be. So I backed off, told the caregivers, let's try in 10 minutes, walked away, picked up some chocolate out of the office, and remembered a joke that a friend of mine and I had about seeing a physician routinely. It actually happened to be the same guy, that it felt like going to the principal's office. And so I come up to this lady, I give her a couple pieces of chocolate. She said, "I still don't want to see the damn doctor." I said, "I know, it's kind of like being sent to the principal's office, right?" And she starts to laugh and she smiled. And then it's like, oh, thank God I won. And so she got her coat on, ate more chocolate. We talked about, well, how often did you go to the principal's office? I said, every 3 or 4 months. And at that point, she figured I was a juvenile delinquent, and it was amazing that I didn't end up in jail. The whole 2 stoplights between our house and the doctor's office, we talked about what a good student she was and what a juvenile delinquent I was, and laughed, got to the doctor's appointment. She was fine. We had to avoid the awful sign on the door, but we looked at other people's outfits and ignored that door sign because that would have set it off again. And went through the appointment. She was perfectly fine. She did great. We walk out, and this is the caregiver piece. And she says, "He was a really nice man." and I went home and bought Excedrin. But I realized that I'd had basically the same response as she did to the same stimulus, only my language was a lot worse. The only difference is I could get myself out of it. She needed help to get out of it. That was the only difference. Otherwise, our responses were the same. My language was a whole lot worse though. But it's a normal human response. The other damn doctor story is about the doctor.
Yeah.
One of our elders was having, her health was changing. She was balance problems, more anxious, sleeping a lot more, problems eating. She was changing. And our caregivers were very, very concerned. And they wrote up really detailed notes. And our director took the notes to met the lady's doctor and her daughter for an appointment, took the notes to the doctor. This is a different doctor. Handed this doctor the notes. The doctor looks at the notes that the caregivers had worked very hard on and immediately says, this is the lowest form of information. I don't need these. I was really glad I wasn't at that appointment because I might have slugged her.
Right. You.
But Carol and the daughter stood their ground. What ended up happening is the doctor got tired of dealing with our director and the daughter and wrote an order for a hospice evaluation, which we took because it was a really good way to get rid of that doctor. But they stood their ground. I think one of the pieces to dealing with professionals is either a doctor can be your biggest asset and your biggest helper or your worst enemy. And I wish there was more middle ground. A lot of folks don't get Alzheimer's training. They don't understand how to deal with people with dementia. Really, really common thing. Some people have the book knowledge, but they fall into the kind of language traps around dementia that Yuta pointed out, where they're looking at somebody as a disease and not a human being. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work. Another piece to communicating as caregivers is funding and Medicaid and Medicare and insurance. Know your stuff, stand your ground, don't be afraid to keep asking. Don't be afraid to keep calling. My caregiving experience was with my brother who had Down syndrome. Yuta went through a couple of these with me where we would periodically have to get into real fights with developmental disabilities waiver programs. And we won those fights, but we won them because I really made a point to learn as much as I could about the systems I was dealing with and how to fight them. And Morgan was on the front page of the Santa Fe, New Mexican one year on Christmas Eve because I got a call from someone in developmental disabilities waiver. And he told me you should just institutionalize your brother if you don't like the day program we're offering. And my first step was to call the paper. And I think there's a time for family caregivers that you have to decide this is what the person I'm caring for needs, and I will walk through you to get it. You also have to know when to stop fighting when things are good.
Yeah.
And that feeds into another big issue that we've seen is denial. I've seen families not want to see what's going on with the person that they love. They want to see them as they were before and not meet the person in front of them. And it means the person in front of them doesn't get what they need. And Yuta and I have seen this really up close and personal.
I have to, Ruth, a couple of things I'd like to share. First of all, one habit that most medical professionals have when you walk in as a caregiver with the person that you're caring for is that they will direct everything to you, the caregiver.
Mhm.
And I always would always make sure that I would repeat the question to my client. In this case, I had clients. And the other one is like, they ignore both of you because they're doctors. Like the one doctor with the note said that they're worthless. I had one case that I was telling you about. My client needed same day surgery and outpatient, in other words. So the routine, of course, is that you set up the schedule. You arrive 2 hours before your actual surgery. That's normal, as you probably know. And my client was very restless, and she didn't when she wanted to do things, she wanted to do them right now. Now, there's no waiting. And I knew that. And it took me, I had to go through all the different steps up to the supervisor to actually convince them that we needed to be able to arrive like exactly at the time that they needed us, not 2 hours before, and walk straight into an exam room, okay? And a prep room, whatever they call those. So they finally agreed. I told the supervisor, I said, I'll bring her 2 hours before, but I can't guarantee what condition your waiting room is going to be after that. That kind of scared her. So I got my appointment. We got there exactly on time. Now I knew my client well enough to know the one thing that always helped her was to sing. So I brought one of our songbooks. And of course, we just settled in, and the door opens, and this tall, very elegant doctor walks in with his entourage behind him, the string of nurses and what have you. And he waves me, he didn't say anything. He said, I basically waves me to the door. I could leave now. And I said, oh, okay. But just in case you have problems, Dr. So-and-so, I recommend that you go to, picked up the songbook and opened it, right? So I recommend that you go to page 6 first. And if that doesn't work, try, and that's how far I got. I didn't even get to finish the second part. He said, all of a sudden, he was like, I was telling Ruth, tall, elegant man, shrank like several inches at that point, right? Became a human being. And he said, why don't you stay? I mean, he was a little bit nervous, So you have to stand up to the doctors too. And if nothing else, make sure that you talk to your client, your loved one, or whomever you have with you, so they're not ignored. They have to be part of the conversation. I have one quick anecdote. My son was an interpreter for the deaf. So he'd be hired as an interpreter, in this case for a young couple who were both deaf. And he said it drove him nuts because every time they went to an appointment, they would always address all the questions and everything else to him, not to his clients. And of course, he's translating everything, right? And this one day, the doctor says, are you telling them everything? And Troy said, yes, of course I am. I'm their interpreter. That changed the relationship.
Yeah.
Because doctor knew they were deaf. In our case, they knew that they had dementia, and they start talking about your loved one right in front of them, talking about issues, talking about problems, and it's as if they're not there. They become invisible. So we don't go for that.
Well, and another piece can happen too with some folks with really great verbal skills, is that they can I remember going to a doctor's appointment. I actually kind of did a timeout on the side where the lady couldn't see me and took the doctor outside because this 90-something-year-old lady had convinced this man that she walked 2 miles a day and she ate a perfectly healthy diet and had fruit or salad with every meal. And the truth was, pretzels and ice cream were her favorite foods, and her favorite exercise was rolling her eyes at the person who was trying to get her to exercise, which at the time was me. But it was kind of like, okay, time out, quietly, discreetly, we need to go talk outside real quick. And so I kind of caught the doctor up, and this doctor was willing to do that. I've seen really tough situations where a doctor's not willing to do that or goes into denial. You know, oh, wow, I went to school with this guy. I know him. He's my friend. We're about the same age. He can't really have Alzheimer's. It's not that bad. And meanwhile, there's mold growing inside the fridge. And so it's kind of conversely. You can also make an appointment for you as a caregiver to talk to the doctor separately from the person.
Mhm.
If it's something really critical. And I kind of advise that. I would do that with my brother as well. If there was something that I figured would really freak him out, I would make a separate appointment and I would go talk to the doctor. And usually Medicare will not cover that, but it's worth paying for one appointment to get something major done.
And I always made a point out of getting to know the main nurse
Yeah,
really well. There's one person in the office that you really can talk to and who can actually get the right information to the doctor. And often they actually know more than the doctor does anyway. Of the common stuff, you know.
well, and systems by and large, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, the VA, they're not really bright about how they deal with Alzheimer's.
Right.
You know, one piece of the waivers for a long time was no overnight caregivers, which was fine for me with my brother with developmental disabilities. Not so fine with Alzheimer's. A lot of folks with Alzheimer's, the family could really use an overnight caregiver. It would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's finally changed, thank God. But it's a matter of trying to find ways to support your person and yourself. And communication is not just the elder, but it's also you with yourself, you with the doctor, you with the systems. So it's complicated, and give yourselves a lot of credit for the work you're doing. You know, guys, do you have any questions? We're running out of time fast, so.
I'm checking. There's got to be some questions. I know, Ruth, I know we're brilliant, but we're not that brilliant, honey.
I was going to say there are 37. Anyway.
No questions?
Hi, this is Roki. I had a question. Well, I was trying to ask you last week and then my internet cut out. So it was about talking to my mom. I appreciate the information on standing up to the doctors and all of that. I mean, that's literally how I got her diagnosed in the first place. Because, it's just hard for people to hear you about behaviors that aren't happening right there in the doctor's office. So I feel you and I appreciate the validation on that. My question is, with talking to my mom, it's something that has been on my conscience. I feel so bad about it. So I am literally up to here with repeating myself. You feel me? I am tired, absolutely 100%. Sometimes I envision myself like just having a meltdown with my mom, like shut up, or not not shut up, but just like, I refuse to answer. I'm not answering anymore. So, because it's repetitive, it gets to my last bit of like modicum of, I don't know what the word is. Like, I'm about to lose my mind repeating myself.
No,
And so here's the question. Is it okay for me to just tell my mom, after about 12 times, I'll just try to calmly explain to her, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm not going to answer that. And I just stop. I stop answering. So she'll keep asking, and the response is just silence. And I feel bad for her. I feel bad for the whole situation, but I just cannot repeat it another time. I just, no, I can't. So, thoughts?
actually, I have one thought, and it in some ways is kind of a softer way to say what you just said, but is, Mom, I love you. Let's take a few minutes and not talk, okay? Let's take a
Okay,
few
bye.
breaths. Another thing is to just change the subject right away. I literally had a lady who would ask for her husband, but her memory of her husband was a much younger man than the man she was married to. But she would ask for him literally without breathing in between. Where's my husband? Where's my husband? Where's my husband? Where? And she would get short of breath. And so the way we would defer that is, oh yeah, he went to the store. We sent him to the hardware store, and she was good with that. And then, okay, let's go do something else. Let's go listen to music. Let's go watch this movie. Where's my husband? I want to see the movie with him. It's girls' night out. We're going to go watch the movie. But another piece to that, Rocky, is caregiver respite. Is you got to find a way to where you can get a little bit of a breather. Whether it's a day program, whether it's a short-term respite. I worked with a family who could not afford Vista, but they would save up enough money they had like a little vacation account, and they would save up enough money to do 2 weeks respite, or, like 1 week or 2 weeks respite a year. And that's when they would go on, like this lady and her husband would literally leave town, go to a cabin with no phones for a week. And it helped save her as a caregiver. If you have a family member who could come in and sub for you at least 1 or 2 evenings a week, that can make a world of difference. Because the repetition is not that they forgot your answer. They forgot the question never registered. That memory was never written down in their brains at all. It's just gone. And I think sometimes this repetitive stuff can be almost a self-soothing thing, almost like someone with autism moving an arm or rocking. It's the verbal equivalent of that.
Or trying to make connection with you, the caregiver, but they didn't really have anything to say. It was just, they just wanted to know that you were there and that you heard them. Mm-hmm. And you were paying attention to them. It just, who knows? It's kind of, little kids do it too. It's just we're used to it with little kids.
The other question, though, I hope you guys can answer is, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
Oh, that's a pretty straightforward. Yep. Think of, some people say an umbrella. I like the analogy of a tree. Dementia is the trunk of the tree. It's all the different processes. Alzheimer's is one of the branches, probably the most well-studied branch. Mm-hmm. There's also vascular dementia, which is related to small strokes. Pick's disease, Lewy body disease. There are about 400 different types of dementia, but they all have a common trunk of certain symptoms: difficulty reasoning, short-term memory loss, changes in physical function, you know.
In what age do these, like, when would dementia start?
The youngest known case is like 28, Yuta, am I right about that?
9 years old, honey.
9 years old?
Yeah,
Okay,
9 years
wow.
old. So there is the most common is actually people in the later stages of their lives.
After 65.
Yeah. We call
The-
anything before 65, we call early onset dementia. And Ruth and I actually have a friend in common who is living with early onset dementia.
Answering questions.
Yep. Yes. Who had a question?
Shandace has her hand up.
Oh, okay. I can't,
Well, and
I'm only getting.
the other piece to the age part is statistically after 65 your chances increase.
Yep.
Does the person, would they know that they were having it? Because I have some clients that say, like, I'm forgetting stuff, and they're themselves are getting worried. Should I go see somebody? Should I do something? Because I keep forgetting. That's what they'll say.
And I would say yes, get a really good physical.
Yeah.
Get with blood work and the whole 9 yards. There are, of all those 400 some odd types of dementia, about 10% of those are reversible.
Mm-hmm.
So if your B12 is low, depression is a tricky one because there's a point of no return with depression. But if you get treated and you get counseling, depression doesn't have to lead into dementia, but it can. PTSD causes some folks to lose short-term memory. So you'll see vets who are quite young who have dementia because of PTSD or head trauma.
TBI, traumatic brain injury too.
TBI, yeah. And a lot of folks do know, I've worked with several folks who are very aware that something's wrong and that they can't quite put all the pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
What I say, if there's something you've always been really good at and you start forgetting how to do it, call a doctor. If it's something you're not so good at and if I forget to balance my checkbook, it's Tuesday. I have a good friend who balances it to the penny. If Linda forgets to balance her checkbook, she should call a doctor. If I forget how to talk, I should call a doctor. So
and asking for a physical, the very least, with a blood test is your best bet to start, I guess you say.
That's probably the best place to start because they can rule out at least some of the things that are reversible. So if your thyroid is way off, also I do think seeing a neurologist, although they're few and far between in New Mexico, and sometimes they're really annoying human beings. But sorry, I didn't mean that in a bad way. But a neurologist or a psychiatrist can do a really good battery of tests. UNM in Albuquerque has a memory center that is really good. The wait list for an appointment is about 4 months. But
for that, do you have to be referred or can you call them yourself?
You can call them yourself.
Mm-hmm. Could we get that information in the chat?
Actually, I can, if I can find it, to dig it up and write it down, or I can email it to Dana and have her send it out.
That would be great because sometimes, especially on the reservation, and with COVID and everything, you get a negative response. So if it's something that we could do and where we can call ourselves would be great.
Yeah, and another thing that I would do is call the Alzheimer's Association. They do have a list of doctors that specialize in dementia. And you and I
That's
are,
important.
yeah, that is important. Although one of the worst doctors for Alzheimer's I ever knew in my life was a geriatrician. So,
Right. Yeah, yeah. And
I-
ask,
I just-
and also, ask people like us.
yeah,
Like ask me, ask Ruth, and ask around, because we over the years we have, like Ruth said, we've encountered good and bad.
Actually,
And
are you one of the folks that bought the book? UNM is listed in the book with their contact information. It's UNM Memory and Aging Center.
and they're very good. They're really good.
UNM.edu/health/patient line care/neurosciences. So, in a lot of like the resource list for, I talked about dementiapossibilities.com.
Mhm.
That website has a really, really good resource list on it.
And some
But-
great videos.
And so,
Ruth?
yes,
Let me just jump in for a second. I put this in the chat, but I just wanted to make a couple announcements. We understand we went over time, so if you need to leave, feel free to do so. However, if you do have questions and want to stay a little bit to ask them, as long as Ruth and Judith are ready willing to do that, you're welcome to stay. Those of you that were in last session were mailed a book last week. If you're new to this session, you'll get mailed a book next week. Regarding the handouts, I did attach
Yeah,
them to the
I'll
email
keep it
reminder
that way.
that went out yesterday. However, I will also send it again on Monday.
also, Yuda has done a couple of books on Alzheimer's A to Z. Really good, kind of straightforward talking dementia book. Also, the Alzheimer's Creativity Project is one that we actually use at Vista with our activities directors. A lot of really good ideas for redirecting, like the constant questions and fun. It's the fun stuff. It's the cool stuff. Yeah.
And I hope it's a fun book to read too.
Yeah.
I try to make it, from my experience, this can be such a heavy topic that it's very important that we also get our information across without adding to the burden that people already feel.
But
You know,
I also
I
think,
love your book, Ruth, because it really gives you a picture of the inside.
yeah, and I think one of the pieces to, and I just have to put this out there for any family caregiver, you're watching somebody you love change. Every change that's hard to do. There are also really, really beautiful parts to caregiving. My brother developed cognitive issues in the last 2 years of his life. The last 2 years of his life were probably the toughest years of my life. They were also some of the most beautiful years of my life. And he had a really, really good time. And I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it's true. And it's true for our elders too. And not just at Vista. There are people all over this state doing some amazing, amazing work. And
We have another question in the chat
okay.
from Tierney. It says, is it common for one to think they have to go somewhere or that they need to call someone, or is that, or that someone
Oh,
is coming
yes.
to see them?
Yes.
And how would you go about telling them?
We're gonna get into that in a big way next week, but there is, Yuta used the term wanderer as one of those things you should not label someone with. Wandering is a behavioral expression in Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
And the need to, and I think it's a gut level thing. I've got to go, I've got to get somewhere, and sometimes I won't really know where they've got to go. It's just almost this kind of interior restlessness. And I think it's a coping mechanism, honestly. I think it's self-soothing. I also think it's trying to find a purpose in life.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to deal with that is to find something to do that's productive.
Would that
So
include like driving
sleep,
around and just buying like random stuff as well?
it can be,
Or
it
things
can,
that they don't need, but they're buying because they need that purpose?
yeah. I actually am dealing with a family, Yolanda at Sierra Vista is dealing with a family who dad orders shoes online and he has 80 pairs of shoes now because he's trying to figure out some purpose to his life. So he's gotten into QVC, which is not a good thing. But it can, one of the things to get worried about, if someone's behavior changes and
Mhm.
it's not in their usual wellhouse, it can be a sign that dementia is going on. It doesn't necessarily hit memory first all the times. We've
Right.
had folks who've developed addictions when they get particularly frontal lobe dementia, because the impulse part of the brain turns off. Also, they know something's wrong and they're self-medicating with shopping or food or alcohol or drugs or sex. Some folks act out sexually early on because it's a way of trying to cope. It's a way to self-medicate. It's like,
Shanti, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I wanted to know about are you guys going to be talking about eating later on with dementia and speaking with the dementia also later on?
we can talk about eating, yes.
Um,
Appetite changes. Some people appetite decreases. Taste in foods change. Other people eat way too much and start eating non-food items.
yeah,
So food is complicated.
And
well, my grandpa had a stroke and he got dementia afterwards. He's on stage 3. And so he's been trying to, he is eating despite went way down. And we've been trying to give him different flavors of Ensures. He doesn't like them. So I've been trying to do a lot of new things with his food and everything. But do you guys know the best recommendation of the Ensure, a different kind of Ensures or something?
My brother, part of it, and it depends on, and please forgive me for what I'm about to say. Some people, as they are ending their life, eat less. They're not craving food as much. They're not as hungry. My brother did. That can be part of the changes. There's a beautiful, beautiful book by Denise Cope called Dying a Natural Process, and it talks a lot about eating, and it's really good.
it's the best book on the process of dying.
Yeah, and with
You
dementia,
really
you
don't
take that
understand.
book and instead of a few months, you stretch it out for years.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I also work with dementias. One guy, he's a Marine and he doesn't speak. He only speaks like a few words. And
Yeah.
then he just like says, yeah. He goes like, yeah, good night, bye. And I'm just
And some people eat less because they don't know what to do. So
Yeah.
if they get a little help, they'll eat better. My brother actually liked Ensure Clear better than the Milky Ensure. It has fewer calories, but it does have the minerals and the nutrients. So it
I have a
can be
question.
helpful, and it tastes good. It tastes like Gatorade.
Shantas, can he still eat, would he be able to eat like a sandwich, or does he have to be on a liquid diet?
No, he can eat, he can drink well. He drinks a lot of water, but sometimes he doesn't have an appetite. Later on, then he'll think that he has. He thinks that he ate, then he didn't eat, and then we have to like change his mind. And my aunties and uncles, they get kind of upset with him. I'm like, you don't do that.
And some people become
What I'm gonna
grazer.
suggest is that you try a couple of things. First of all, try red plates,
Mhm. That's a good one.
as bright red as you can get them.
Okay.
And because red, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it makes it a lot easier to see the food, and it stands out, except for tomatoes, of course. But the other thing is that red, it also stimulates your appetite. If you think about it, all restaurants use a warm golden. It's always warm colors. The only time you see cool colors is in an ice cream parlor, and there's a reason for it. You'll eat more in a restaurant with red, and red plates have been amazingly effective in helping people eat more when they need to. And the other thing is that well, a couple other things. He may, if there's any chance his eyesight is bad, then that red plate is very important. And I would cut up. It depends on where he is now. He may still be able to use a fork. If he's not, if he's able to use his fingers, I would cut up a sandwich into small bite-sized
Bite-sized
pieces.
pieces.
If he's overwhelmed, which also happens, if he sits there and just looks at a plate and looks at the food and he doesn't do anything, there could be a couple of factors. One, like Ruth said, that he doesn't remember how to use utensils anymore, or is confused about which one to use. So you only give him whatever he needs to use right now.
Or it's too much information. There are too many things on the plate. You can't figure out
Right,
where to
exactly.
get started.
Yeah.
Or they're different types of food, like you don't serve potato chips, meatloaf. Let me see, that's finger food and fork food, and anything that has to be cut on one plate.
Yeah.
You just don't. You serve
we-
one type of food at a time, and you may have to. I had clients who were overwhelmed with too much food, so they wouldn't eat anything. Sometimes because they were
portions.
in a depression and there was too much food, and they would say, I can't eat all of this. I don't want all of this. Give it to somebody else. So they
And
wouldn't
they
eat
were
anything.
the generation that was told never waste food, clean your
Right.
plate
And
all
they
the
knew,
time. So
they-
smaller plates.
in facilities in particular, they have a very bad habit of having these big full plates, just like in a restaurant. And there's too much food. It's just a mass of it.
It's
So
better to give somebody
smaller
seconds
plate.
of a smaller plate.
Yeah, smaller plate and smaller portions.
Yeah,
And replenish it. You can replenish it, and he might end up eating a lot more than you expect.
Some people also become grazers, where instead of sitting down and eating a meal, they eat a little bit all the time.
Right.
okay,
Or they get
thank
up
you,
and
guys.
walk, and they because with some dementias, there's a physical phenomenon where the body has to move.
Mm.
And if
Yeah.
that's the case, then they need to walk all the time. And so what we would do is actually give them a bite-sized piece of sandwich every time they pass by.
The
What about if
drive-through.
they're in a walker and they hardly use their legs? Like, I usually help them, and I'm like, come on, you gotta use your legs, and they'll like scoot, and then they're done. And so when I try,
A lot of people think of the brain and the body as getting a bad divorce. So the brain and the body aren't having a good conversation. So you'll see people shuffle or scissor their feet when they walk. And and some people do lose their mobility. But one of the things that we do a lot at Vista, and Yuta has done before too, is when you can do exercises in a chair where and one of the best ones that we do that really works well for our elders is to put your legs out in front of you and point your toes and lift your toes. Point, lift your heels, march in place so that you're keeping some muscle strength. And I do have elders who forget how to use a walker, and they'll walk with a caregiver on each arm or with a caregiver holding them around their waist.
One thing I would suggest too, really quick, like when